When a woman in a wheelchair enters a luxury shoe store, nobody expected her to change everything. But when she suddenly stands up and calls for the manager, one employee's world is turned upside down. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more moving stories. The sunlight streaming through the large, crystal-clear windows of Crown and Soul reflected off the marble floors, creating a pristine, almost heavenly glow. Everything in the upscale shoe store was polished to perfection, from the chrome display racks to the perfectly aligned rows of luxury footwear. The air smelled of leather, cedar, and subtle floral undertones, the kind of atmosphere designed to make customers feel like royalty. Emma stood near the front of the store, her eyes scanning the layout. Every shoe was perfectly placed, every display flawless. Her heart swelled with pride. As an associate, she took her job seriously. To her, every detail mattered. She brushed off a speck of dust from a display stand, her fingers gentle but precise. Across the store, Vanessa leaned against the cashier's counter, scrolling on her phone with a bored expression. Her long, manicured nails tapped noisily on the screen as she scrolled through her social media feed. She glanced up just in time to see Emma adjusting the shoes again. "You're doing too much, Emma," Vanessa sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "These rich folks don't care about how shiny the shelves are. They only care about the price tag." Emma ignored her, focusing on a pair of sleek black heels that had been slightly out of line. "It's called having standards, Vanessa," she replied calmly. "It's what separates us from stores like Drake's." Vanessa let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Drake's makes twice what we do, and I bet nobody's in there dusting shelves like a maid." She rolled her eyes, returning to her phone. Emma exhaled through her nose, choosing peace. Vanessa had always been like this, sharp-tongued, always looking for shortcuts and never willing to go the extra mile. It was a wonder she still had a job. A soft, rhythmic clicking echoed from the front entrance, slowly growing louder. Emma glanced toward the glass doors, her brow furrowing slightly. The automated doors slid open with a gentle hiss, and in rolled a wheelchair, its sleek black wheels cutting across the polished marble. The woman seated in it moved with purpose. Her head was held high, her sharp eyes scanning the store with quiet intensity. Her crisp white blouse was tucked neatly into tailored gray slacks, and a statement necklace of pearls rested around her neck. Despite the wheelchair, there was something regal about her presence. Emma's eyes immediately lit up, and she moved forward with a warm, welcoming smile. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to Crown and Soul. How can I help you today?" Vanessa glanced up from her phone, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the woman in the wheelchair. Her face twisted into a mixture of disbelief and disdain. "Are you serious right now?" Vanessa muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Emma to hear. "She's not buying anything." Emma shot her a glare. "Don't be rude, Vanessa." But Vanessa had already pushed off from the counter, crossing her arms with a smirk. "I'm just saying, people don't roll into stores like this looking for Prada pumps." She tilted her head loud enough for the customer to hear. "Shoes this expensive aren't exactly wheelchair-friendly." Emma's heart stopped. Her eyes darted to the woman in the wheelchair, praying she hadn't heard. But the slow, deliberate movement of the woman's head told her otherwise. Her eyes, sharp as daggers, turned to Vanessa with an icy calm. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice steady and firm. She wheeled herself forward, each push of the wheel deliberate. "Would you care to repeat that for me?" Vanessa froze, her face suddenly tight with panic. She glanced at Emma, then back at the woman, trying to brush it off. "I didn't mean anything by it," Vanessa muttered, folding her arms tighter across her chest. "Just, never mind." "Ah," the woman replied slowly, her eyes narrowing as if studying every inch of Vanessa's face. "I see. You didn't mean anything by it, yet you said it anyway. Isn't that interesting?" Emma stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry for what you heard. We value every customer here, and I'd be more than happy to assist you with whatever you need." She shot Vanessa a glance that could have set fire to stone. The woman tilted her head slightly, her eyes lingering on Emma with interest, then slowly returned her gaze to Vanessa. She tapped the armrest of her wheelchair twice, as if contemplating something important. "Actually," she said slowly, "I'd like to see your collection of designer heels. The limited edition ones. And I'd like her," she gestured toward Vanessa, "to bring them to me." Vanessa's eyes nearly bulged out of her head. "Me? Oh, I'm not on the floor right now," she stammered. "I'm managing returns and stuff." "Interesting," the woman replied, her face expressionless. "You don't seem very busy." Her eyes flicked down to the phone still clutched in Vanessa's hand. "But since you're not busy, I'm sure you can manage to bring me the shoes. Or would you prefer I ask someone with more professionalism?" Emma bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. Vanessa's face went red with embarrassment, and for once she had no smart comeback. "Yes, ma'am," Vanessa muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She stormed off toward the back room, her heels clicking louder than usual. Once Vanessa was gone, Emma turned back to the woman. "I'm really sorry about that," she said sincerely. "If you'd prefer, I can help you personally." The woman leaned back in her wheelchair, her eyes crinkling in quiet amusement. "You're kind, Emma. I can tell you have a heart for this business." Emma blinked in surprise. Thank you, ma'am. How did you know my name?" The woman's smile widened. "I know more than you think." Before Emma could ask further, Vanessa returned with a large black box, clearly irritated as she placed it on the display table. "Here. The limited edition pumps. Happy now?" The woman smiled sweetly. "Very." But just as Vanessa turned to walk away, the woman pushed the brakes on her wheelchair. Her hands gripped the armrests. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, locked on Vanessa. "I'm not done," the woman said, her voice taking on a tone of quiet authority. She glanced at Emma. "I'd like to see your manager." Emma hesitated, sensing something bigger was about to happen. "Of course. I'll call them right away." "No need," the woman replied, pressing down on the armrests of her chair. Vanessa's eyes widened as she realized what was about to happen. Wait, what are you?" The woman slowly, steadily stood up. Her full height was revealed as she rose with perfect posture. Her gaze swept across the store, her presence now towering, no longer confined to the seat of a wheelchair. Customers turned, gasps echoed. Emma's heart thudded in her chest. Even Vanessa stumbled back, her eyes wide with disbelief. The woman dusted off her blouse and glanced at Vanessa with piercing authority. "I believe introductions are in order," she said, her voice carrying through the store like the peal of a bell. She stepped forward, heels clicking on the marble floor. "My name is Patricia Coleman. Perhaps you've heard of me. My son, Matthew Coleman, owns this store." Dead silence. Emma's breath caught in her chest, her heart racing as her eyes darted toward Vanessa. The color drained from Vanessa's face as realization sank in like a stone thrown into deep water. Patricia turned to Emma, a slow, approving smile forming on her face. "Emma, would you be so kind as to get my son on the phone? I'd like him to be present for the next part of this conversation." Emma nodded, pulling her phone from her pocket, her fingers moving swiftly. Vanessa staggered backward, her face pale as if she'd seen a ghost. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know who you were." Patricia's gaze didn't waver. If respect requires knowing someone's title, it's not respect at all. It's fear. And you should be very afraid right now. The sound of Matthew Coleman's voice crackled through the phone. Emma's voice trembled as she said, "Sir, your mother is here, and she's asked for you to come immediately." "Put her on the line," Matthew replied. Patricia's eyes never left Vanessa as she took the phone. "Hello, Matthew. We need to talk." The tension inside Crown and Soul was thick enough to be cut with a knife. Every customer and employee stood frozen in silence, eyes darting back and forth between Patricia Coleman and Vanessa. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Emma clutched the phone to her ear, her heart pounding like a drum. On the other end of the line, Matthew Coleman's voice was sharp and commanding. "Put her on," Matthew instructed firmly. Emma glanced nervously at Patricia. Without a word, Patricia reached out her hand, eyes still locked on Vanessa like a lion cornering its prey. Emma quickly handed her the phone. "Matthew," Patricia said, her voice as calm as still water but with the weight of an ocean behind it. "I'm at your store. I had the unfortunate pleasure of meeting one of your employees, Vanessa." Emma watched as Patricia's eyes narrowed into slits, her words deliberate and cutting. Vanessa flinched with every syllable. "No, you'll want to hear this in person," Patricia continued, pacing slowly around the store like a queen inspecting her kingdom. "Yes, right now. I'll be waiting." She pulled the phone away from her ear and handed it back to Emma. "He's on his way," Patricia said with a sharp smile. "He won't be happy." Vanessa's eyes darted to Emma, silently pleading for some kind of support, but Emma kept her face neutral. There was nothing she could do to save her. "Please, Mrs. Coleman," Vanessa stammered, her words coming out in a desperate flurry. "I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't know who you were." Patricia raised an eyebrow. Her eyes flickered with disappointment. "You think this is about who I am?" she asked, tilting her head. You think respect only matters when a person has power? Vanessa's lips moved, but no words came out. Patricia leaned in, close enough for only Vanessa to hear. Her voice was soft but razor-sharp. If you need to know someone's title to treat them with decency, then you have no business working here. Vanessa blinked rapidly, her eyes beginning to glisten. I'm sorry, she muttered, her voice cracking. I was just having a bad day. That's all. Congratulations, Patricia replied, stepping back and lifting her chin with regal poise. It's about to get worse. Emma bit her bottom lip, unsure of whether she should feel sorry for Vanessa or let her face the storm she had created. She knew one thing for certain: Patricia Coleman wasn't the kind of person you crossed. 20 minutes later. The sleek, jet-black Mercedes pulled up to the curb outside Crown and Soul, its engine barely making a sound as it idled. Through the clear glass storefront, every employee, customer, and onlooker watched as Matthew Coleman stepped out. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. His presence alone was enough to turn heads. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a subtle pinstripe, Matthew's broad shoulders and sharp jawline gave him the commanding air of a CEO who didn't tolerate nonsense. As he entered, his gaze swept the store with cool precision. No words. Just a quiet assessment of everything and everyone in the room. His eyes finally settled on his mother, standing like a monarch at the center of it all. Mom, he greeted, his eyes narrowing as he approached. What happened? Patricia turned slowly, her eyes flicking toward Vanessa with the subtlety of a sniper lining up a shot. Her. Matthew's gaze shifted, laser-focused on Vanessa. She froze like a deer in headlights. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, his expression unreadable. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. She dropped her gaze to the floor, her confidence crumbling to dust. Emma, Matthew called, his voice smooth but firm. Join me in the office. You too, Vanessa? Emma's heart skipped. Her stomach flipped with nerves, but she nodded, quietly following Matthew as he strode toward the back. Patricia watched them go, her lips pursed in approval. Inside the back office. The office was as sleek and modern as the store, with glass walls, white leather chairs, and a polished black desk that looked like it belonged in a billionaire's penthouse. Matthew sat at the desk, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled together as he watched Vanessa like a hawk. Vanessa and Emma sat side by side, but the energy between them couldn't have been more different. Emma sat upright, hands folded in her lap, eyes attentive. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Matthew didn't speak right away. He let the silence do its work. Every second that ticked by felt like an hour. Vanessa squirmed in her chair, unable to hold his gaze. Finally, Matthew leaned forward, elbows on the desk. His eyes were sharp, his words slow and deliberate. Tell me what happened, he said, his voice calm but loaded with authority. Vanessa glanced at Emma, then back at Matthew. It was a misunderstanding, Mr. Coleman, she said quickly, her voice trembling. The woman, your mom, I didn't know she was your mom. I wouldn't have said anything if I knew. Matthew hummed, his gaze not moving an inch. And what exactly did you say? Vanessa hesitated. I just said. Say it, he pressed. Her eyes darted to Emma as if begging for help, but Emma stayed silent. She had no interest in covering for Vanessa. Not this time. I said something like, wheelchairs don't need stilettos? Vanessa's voice was barely above a whisper. The silence in the room was deafening. Matthew closed his eyes slowly, his jaw clenching. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. Vanessa, he said slowly, what do you think our store's mission is? Vanessa blinked, unsure if it was a trick question. To sell luxury shoes? No, he said firmly, opening his eyes and locking them onto hers. It's to provide access to luxury. To make people feel seen. Understood. Valued. Every single person who walks through that door is worthy of being treated with respect. Vanessa opened her mouth, but Matthew held up his hand, stopping her. I don't want excuses, he said coldly. I want you to understand that your attitude today didn't just hurt a customer. It embarrassed this brand. It embarrassed me. And worst of all, you embarrassed yourself. The words hit harder than a slap. Vanessa sank deeper into her chair, eyes glistening with the threat of tears. Effective immediately, Matthew said, his voice like stone, you're on probation. Your hours are reduced and your role is under review. Consider it your one and only warning. Vanessa swallowed hard, nodding. Yes, sir. Leave? Vanessa stood, hands trembling. She glanced at Emma, her eyes filled with something that almost resembled gratitude before rushing out the door. The moment she left, Matthew turned to Emma, his face softening slightly. "Now let's talk about you," he said, his eyes meeting hers. Emma's chest tightened. She sat up straighter, unsure of what was coming. "I watched the store's security footage," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I saw how you handled everything, how you tried to calm the situation, how you treated my mother with respect from the moment she walked in." Emma's throat felt dry. "Thank you, sir. I was doing my job." "You did more than that," Matthew replied, leaning forward with a small smile. "You showed leadership." Emma blinked, unsure of where this was going. "I want you to be the new store manager," Matthew said plainly. "Effective immediately." Her heart stopped. "Wait, me? Store manager?" "Yes," he said, standing to shake her hand. "You earned it." Her hands shook as she reached out to take his. It felt surreal. Vanessa's angry words, Patricia's subtle nod of approval, and now this, it was all happening so fast. "Don't doubt it, Emma," Matthew said, gripping her hand firmly. "This place needs someone with a heart like yours." Emma walked out of the office, head held high, her mind still processing her promotion. But standing just outside, leaning against the wall, was Vanessa. Her eyes followed Emma with a mix of bitterness and something far more dangerous. Quiet, simmering jealousy. "Enjoy it while it lasts," Vanessa muttered. Her eyes met Emma's with a cold stare. Emma met her gaze, standing firm. "I plan to." Emma stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the back office, straightening her name tag. The new title stared back at her as if testing her resolve. Emma Thompson, store manager. It still didn't feel real. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mother would be so proud. For so long Emma had been overlooked, passed up for promotions, told she wasn't ready. But now she was in charge. Her reflection stared back at her, nerves and excitement clashing in her chest. "You've got this," she whispered to herself. "You've worked for this." A sharp knock on the door jolted her out of her thoughts. She quickly turned, smoothing out her blouse as the door opened. Vanessa stood there, leaning against the frame, arms folded, one brow raised in pure defiance. Her eyes flicked to Emma's name tag, and her lips curled into a smirk. "Manager, huh?" Vanessa's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Well, congratulations, boss." She dragged out the last word with just enough venom to make it sting. Emma held her ground, refusing to let Vanessa's words get under her skin. "Thanks, Vanessa. I'm looking forward to working with you." Vanessa scoffed, stepping into the office and letting the door swing shut behind her. "Oh, please. Don't pretend like you didn't love every second of watching me get humiliated." She stepped closer, her eyes hard as steel. "You think just 'cause you've got that fancy title you're better than me now?" Emma's gaze didn't waver. "I think I'm the same person I was yesterday, Vanessa. You might try being that person too." For a moment, Vanessa's jaw tightened. Her eyes flashed with something unreadable, anger maybe, or something much deeper. But she didn't say another word. Instead, she rolled her eyes, turned on her heel, and walked out of the office with a flick of her hair. Emma stood still for a moment, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She straightened her posture. "You're the store manager now, Emma. Act like it." Later that day, the store buzzed with activity. The soft hum of jazz music played overhead, and customers wandered through the polished aisles, admiring the pristine shoe displays. Emma walked the floor, making small adjustments, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. She spotted Vanessa by the cash register, half-heartedly folding paper bags while scrolling through her phone. Emma walked up to her. "Vanessa," Emma said, her tone calm but firm. "Phone's away on the floor." Vanessa shot her a glance, one brow raised as if daring her to push it. "Seriously? That's what you're worried about right now?" "Yes," Emma replied, folding her arms. "I am." "Put it away." Vanessa held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then slipped the phone into her back pocket with a slow, deliberate motion. "Happy, boss?" Emma tilted her head. "Not until you stop calling me boss like it's a curse word." Vanessa's lips twitched, but she said nothing. Meanwhile, across town, the rival store, the Drake Collective, hummed with activity as well, but not the friendly kind. Inside his sleek private office, Jonathan Drake sat at a glass desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the smooth surface. His sharp green eyes scanned a sales report with cold precision. Across from him, a young man sat stiffly in his chair. His name was Ethan Reed, a nervous but eager informant. "Tell me again," Jonathan said, his eyes still on the report. His voice was smooth as silk but sharp as broken glass. "How bad is it over there at Crown and Soul?" Ethan cleared his throat. Not great, Mr. Drake. They're short-staffed and there's tension on the floor. I overheard one of the employees, Vanessa, complaining about their new store manager. Jonathan's lips curled into a slow grin. Ah yes, Emma Thompson, right? He glanced at Ethan, his eyes glittering with mischief. I hear she's new to management. Inexperienced. Perfect. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the table in rhythm with his next words. Here's what I want you to do, Ethan. You're going to keep an eye on them. Watch for slip-ups. If Emma makes a mistake, I want to know. If Vanessa's attitude causes a problem, I want to know. Every weakness. Every mistake. Every opportunity. Yes, Mr. Drake, Ethan said quickly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Jonathan leaned back, his grin still in place. Because when the cracks start to show, he said with a wicked grin, that's when we drive the wedge. Back at Crown and Soul. Vanessa stood behind the counter, jaw tight as she watched Emma speaking with a customer. Her eyes lingered on Emma's name tag, the word store manager seeming to mock her. It should have been her. It was supposed to be her. The voice in the back of her head whispered, that could have been you if you just played it right. Her eyes darted toward Emma, who was laughing warmly with the customer. Emma's smile was soft, her body language open and approachable. She looked like a natural, like she belonged in charge. Vanessa hated it. Her fists clenched at her sides. You don't get to win that easily, Emma. Later that evening, the store had quieted down. Most of the customers had gone, and the last few employees were cleaning up. Emma checked inventory, taking careful notes as she walked along the back stockroom. Every box was accounted for, every label double-checked. Vanessa walked in behind her, quiet as a cat. So, big boss, she said casually, what's next on the agenda? You gonna start handing out demerits? Emma sighed but didn't turn around. If you're bored, Vanessa, I'm happy to assign you more work. Not bored, Vanessa muttered. Just wondering how long it'll take before you crack. Emma turned slowly, facing Vanessa with calm but serious eyes. Vanessa, I'm not going to crack. I know you're hoping I will, but I won't. She tilted her head, her gaze steady as stone. But you might. Vanessa blinked, not expecting the response. Her mouth opened as if she had something to say, but nothing came out. You know what I see when I look at you? Emma said softly, stepping forward. I see someone who's angry at the world because they feel like it owes them something. Her eyes scanned Vanessa from head to toe. But let me tell you something. No one owes you anything. Not me. Not this store. Not life. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Her pride wouldn't let her stay silent. Don't act like you know me, Emma. I don't have to know you, Emma replied. Your attitude does all the talking for you. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on Emma's with quiet defiance. You think you're untouchable now, huh? She hissed. You think you're safe because you've got a new title? Emma didn't flinch. She didn't back down. No, she said plainly. I'm not safe, but I'm ready. Vanessa glared at her for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. But Emma saw it, the hesitation in Vanessa's steps, the slight dip in her shoulders. Maybe there's hope for her yet. Back in his private office, Jonathan Drake stood by the window, staring out over the city skyline. His phone vibrated. A message. He unlocked it, his eyes scanning the text. Ethan, spy, employee Vanessa is growing restless. Store manager Emma is new, but she's strong-willed. Possible friction between them. I'll keep you posted. Jonathan's grin widened. Perfect, he said softly to himself. Friction is how fires start. The air inside Crown and Soul was electric with tension. Employees moved with mechanical precision, their eyes darting toward the new store manager, Emma, whenever she walked by. She could feel it too, the weight of their stares, the silent judgments, the unspoken doubts. But she kept her head high. She had no choice. Emma stepped into the middle of the store, scanning the displays like a general inspecting her troops before battle. A crooked shoe here. A misaligned display there. Her eyes caught every flaw, every imperfection. She moved with purpose, correcting each one as she went. Behind the cash register, Vanessa leaned on the counter, filing her nails like she didn't have a care in the world. Her eyes followed Emma's every move with the sharpness of a hawk. Careful, Emma, Vanessa called, barely looking up. If you straighten that heel any more, it might snap in half. Emma didn't rise to the bait. Maybe I should straighten a few attitudes while I'm at it, she shot back, her tone cool but firm. Vanessa's lips curled into a slow grin. She stepped away from the counter, arms crossed, watching Emma with narrowed eyes. I guess being the boss means you think you're funny now, huh? No, Vanessa, Emma replied, finally turning to face her. Being the boss means I don't have to be. There was a pause, a long, tense pause, before Vanessa laughed loud and sharp. Okay, Thompson. I see you. She shook her head, walking away with that signature swagger. Emma let out a slow breath, steadying herself. It was only her third day as manager, and already she was learning that the hardest part of leadership wasn't the work, it was the people. Later that afternoon, the lunch rush had come and gone, leaving the store in a temporary calm. Emma sat in the back office, her laptop open as she reviewed the day's sales. Her eyes scanned the numbers, double-checking each one. A knock at the door pulled her out of focus. Come in, she called. The door swung open and Matthew Coleman stepped inside, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. His tailored gray suit was immaculate as usual, his sharp eyes scanning the room like he was cataloging every detail. Matthew, Emma said, standing up quickly. I wasn't expecting you. Didn't think I needed an appointment to check in on my own store, he said with a grin, motioning for her to sit. Emma sat back down, suddenly hyper-aware of her posture. She folded her hands on the desk in front of her, her heart beating just a little faster. Relax, Matthew said, pulling up a chair. You're doing fine, Emma. Better than I expected, honestly. Emma blinked, caught off guard. Thank you, sir. But I'm here for another reason, he said, leaning forward, his smile fading. We've had an issue with inventory. Several items from last week's shipment are missing. Her heart sank. Missing? Gone, he confirmed. 2 pairs of limited edition shoes and a shipment of high-end leather goods. Emma's mind went into overdrive, replaying the past week. She checked the shipment herself, she was sure of it. I signed off on the inventory, she said slowly, brows furrowed in confusion. I checked every box. Everything was there. That's what I thought too, Matthew replied, his gaze steady but serious. Which means one of 2 things happened. Either the delivery was short or it was tampered with after it arrived. Emma leaned back in her chair, heart thudding in her chest. She didn't need him to spell it out for her. Tampered with after it arrived. Her thoughts immediately went to Vanessa. Do you have any suspects? She asked carefully, not wanting to sound accusatory. Matthew raised an eyebrow, giving her a knowing look. Do I need to say it? Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like assumptions, but she knew Vanessa's track record. If anyone had the motive, or the audacity, to pull something like this, it was her. Watch her, Matthew said, his eyes narrowing. Watch everyone, but watch her especially. Emma nodded, knowing that this was about more than just the missing inventory. This was a test. On the store floor. Vanessa stood at the front register, scanning the store like a lioness watching a herd of gazelles. Her eyes flicked to Emma every few minutes, narrowing with suspicion. She could feel it, Emma was watching her. Her nails tapped on the counter, rhythmically, methodically. Tap, tap, tap. It was driving the other employees crazy, but no one dared tell her to stop. Ethan Reed, the new hire, stood nearby restocking the shelves. He glanced at Vanessa, noticing the tension in her face. You good? He asked quietly, sliding a shoebox onto the shelf. Don't worry about me, Vanessa muttered, her eyes following Emma like a predator stalking prey. But if you're smart, you'll keep your head down and your mouth shut. Ethan raised his hands in surrender. All right. No need to bite. Vanessa didn't respond. Her gaze stayed locked on Emma. You think you're untouchable now, huh? She thought to herself. We'll see about that. The store had emptied out for the night. The only ones left were Emma, Vanessa, and Ethan, who was finishing his shift in the back stockroom. Emma was logging the final inventory counts for the day when she noticed something odd. A pair of high-end leather loafers that had been on display that morning was suddenly missing. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She immediately checked the back stockroom. Her eyes darted to the shelves, scanning for any sign of the missing item. It wasn't there. Vanessa? Emma called, walking quickly to the front. Where's the pair of leather loafers from the center display? Vanessa turned, brows raised in mock confusion. Don't know. Probably still on display. They're not. Emma's eyes narrowed. You didn't touch them? Vanessa shrugged. Not my job to babysit shoes, boss. Emma's patience was wearing thin. I'm asking you directly, Vanessa. Did you see anyone take them? Any customers? Any employees? Vanessa's eyes flashed with defiance. Don't accuse me of stealing, Emma. I didn't touch your precious shoes. Emma took a step closer, her voice low and steady. Then help me find them. For a moment, it looked like Vanessa might push back. Her eyes flickered with rebellion, but something in Emma's face made her hesitate. Fine, Vanessa muttered, turning away. But when you realize it wasn't me, I want an apology. Later that night, Emma sat in the back office, exhausted but determined. She pulled up the security footage for the day, scrolling through the timestamps. 12:45 p.m. The store was busy. Customers moving in and out. Nothing suspicious. 1:22 p.m. Ethan carrying boxes. Vanessa at the register, scrolling on her phone. 1:48 p.m. Vanessa moves to the center display. Her back is turned to the camera, blocking the view. Emma's eyes narrowed. What are you doing, Vanessa? Vanessa bent down, her hands moving quickly, her head shifting as if she's looking around. She straightens up and walks back toward the register. The leather loafers are gone. Emma's heart sank. Her finger hovered over the pause button. She didn't want to believe it, but the footage didn't lie. Vanessa had touched the shoes. The store had emptied out for the night. The only ones left were Emma, Vanessa, and Ethan, who was finishing his shift in the back stockroom. Emma was logging the final inventory counts for the day when she noticed something odd. A pair of high-end leather loafers that had been on display that morning was suddenly missing. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She immediately checked the back stockroom. Her eyes darted to the shelves, scanning for any sign of the missing item. It wasn't there. Vanessa? Emma called, walking quickly to the front. Where's the pair of leather loafers from the center display? Vanessa turned, brows raised in mock confusion. Don't know. Probably still on display. They're not. Emma's eyes narrowed. You didn't touch them? Vanessa shrugged. Not my job to babysit shoes, boss. Emma's patience was wearing thin. I'm asking you directly, Vanessa. Did you see anyone take them? Any customers? Any employees? Vanessa's eyes flashed with defiance. Don't accuse me of stealing, Emma. I didn't touch your precious shoes. Emma took a step closer, her voice low and steady. Then help me find them. For a moment, it looked like Vanessa might push back. Her eyes flickered with rebellion, but something in Emma's face made her hesitate. Fine, Vanessa muttered, turning away. But when you realize it wasn't me, I want an apology. Later that night, Emma sat in the back office, exhausted but determined. She pulled up the security footage for the day, scrolling through the timestamps. 12:45 p.m. The store was busy. Customers moving in and out. Nothing suspicious. 1:22 p.m. Ethan carrying boxes. Vanessa at the register, scrolling on her phone. 1:48 p.m. Vanessa moves to the center display. Her back is turned to the camera, blocking the view. Emma's eyes narrowed. What are you doing, Vanessa? Vanessa bent down, her hands moving quickly, her head shifting as if she's looking around. She straightens up and walks back toward the register. The leather loafers are gone. Emma's heart sank. Her finger hovered over the pause button. She didn't want to believe it, but the footage didn't lie. Vanessa had touched the shoes. Emma sat at the desk, her eyes locked on the paused video footage. Her stomach twisted with a mixture of anger and disappointment. Vanessa, what did you do? She muttered to herself. But just as she went to log the video as evidence, the screen flickered. Static. Her eyes widened. What's going on? The screen flashed black, and when it came back on, the footage for 1:48 p.m. was gone. The timestamp jumped to 2 p.m. Emma stared at the screen, cold realization creeping over her. No, she whispered. No. Somebody had erased the footage. The cold glow of the computer screen lit up Emma's face as she stared at the missing footage. Her heart pounded harder with each second. Her eyes flicked to the timestamps. 1:48 p.m. was gone. Wiped clean. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, fingers trembling with frustration. No. This can't be happening, she muttered, clicking through the other time logs. It didn't matter how many times she refreshed the feed, the gap was still there. Who did this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Suddenly, the door behind her creaked open, and her heart leapt into her throat. She spun around, breath caught in her chest, eyes wide with fear. Vanessa leaned casually against the doorframe, her eyes half-lidded with boredom. She twirled a loose strand of hair around her finger. Burning the midnight oil, huh, boss? Vanessa's voice dripped with faux sweetness. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing on Emma like a predator sizing up its prey. Emma's fingers hovered over the laptop's trackpad, covering the screen. Just finishing up the inventory logs, she said smoothly, keeping her tone neutral. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Must be something interesting if you're sitting in here after hours. Emma didn't respond right away. Her mind was working too fast. Did she know? I take my job seriously, Emma said, giving Vanessa a sharp look. Something you should try. Vanessa's smile faded. She stepped into the room slowly, closing the door behind her with a soft click. "Careful, Emma," Vanessa said, her voice lowering to a dangerous tone. "People who act too perfect usually have something to hide." She glanced at the laptop on the desk, her gaze lingering. Emma tilted her head, her face an unreadable mask. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Tense. Like two storm clouds circling each other before the downpour. Vanessa's lips twitched. "See you around, boss," she said, backing toward the door with that same slow, deliberate swagger. Emma didn't move until Vanessa was gone. The door closed, and she let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She knew one thing for sure. Vanessa was watching her too. The next morning, the store buzzed with early morning energy. The soft chime of the entrance bell echoed as customers strolled in. Emma was already on edge, her mind still reeling from the erased footage. She spotted Vanessa at the front register, her phone hidden just behind the counter, eyes glued to the screen. Emma's jaw tightened. "Vanessa," Emma said as she approached, her voice calm but firm. "Put the phone away." Vanessa didn't look up. "Relax, boss. I'm answering a text." "Vanessa," Emma repeated louder this time. "Phone. Away." Vanessa's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Slowly, she locked the phone and stuffed it in her back pocket, her face twisted in mild irritation. "Happy now, boss?" "Ecstatic," Emma said with a tight smile. She didn't break eye contact until Vanessa did. But just as Emma turned to walk away, something caught her eye. Her gaze snapped back to the register. A slip of paper. No, a receipt, half hidden under the counter. Emma leaned down, plucking it off the ground. Her eyes scanned the text, her pulse quickening. It was a receipt for 2 leather loafers marked as returned at 2:01 p.m. the previous day. Her eyes shot up to Vanessa, who had suddenly gone quiet, her eyes darting nervously to the side. "Vanessa," Emma said slowly, holding up the receipt. "What's this?" Vanessa glanced at it, her face unreadable. "Looks like a return." "What about it?" "It's not signed," Emma said, turning it over. "All returns need to be signed, you know that." Vanessa shrugged, leaning on the counter with feigned nonchalance. "I guess whoever did it forgot." "Really?" Emma's eyes bore into Vanessa's. "Because you were working the register at that time. You're the only one who could have processed this." Silence. Vanessa didn't respond right away. She drummed her nails on the counter, staring off into space like she was deep in thought. Then finally she smiled. "You're reaching, Emma," she said, her voice slow and deliberate. "If I did something wrong, you'd have proof. You don't have proof, do you?" Emma's jaw tightened, her fingers curling around the receipt. She felt her blood run hot, but she didn't let it show. "Not yet," Emma said softly, stuffing the receipt into her back pocket. "But I will." Vanessa's eyes followed Emma as she walked away. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Meanwhile, across town. At the Drake Collective, Jonathan Drake sat at his desk, eyes locked on his phone. A message from Ethan. "Ethan, spy, they're starting to notice." Emma's watching Vanessa hard. Tensions building. "Might be time to stir the pot." Jonathan grinned, tapping his fingers on the desk like a piano. "Perfect," he muttered. "Let them tear each other apart." He typed back. "Time for plan B, cause some technical difficulties and let them think it's an inside job." "Ethan, spy on it." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his grin widening. He could already see it, the collapse of Crown and Soul from within. And he wouldn't even have to lift a finger. Back at Crown and Soul. The day passed with quiet unease. Emma kept her eyes on Vanessa, but something else felt off. Several customers complained about delayed orders, and 2 customers reported receiving the wrong sizes. It wasn't like Emma to miss that many mistakes. She went to the back office, pulling up the system to review the orders. Her fingers moved quickly on the keyboard, checking the history of the shipments. But something was wrong. The files weren't in order. Receipts were misfiled. The customer database was missing critical information. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't a mistake. This was sabotage. "Vanessa," Emma muttered, her eyes darting across the screen. She didn't believe in coincidences. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Matthew Coleman. "Matthew, we've got another complaint from a supplier. Wrong items delivered to our store. Look into it." Emma felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. Her store was falling apart and she was the one who had to hold it together. She stared at her laptop, her gaze sharp with determination. "If someone's trying to make me fail," Emma muttered, "they picked the wrong person." Later that night. The store was empty. Just Emma, Vanessa, and Ethan closing down. Emma kept her eyes on Vanessa, but something wasn't right. Vanessa slipped into the back room. Curious, Emma waited a moment, then followed her quietly. She peeked around the corner, watching Vanessa as she pulled out her phone, glancing around like she was checking if she was being watched. Emma's heart pounded. This is it. I've got you. She reached for her own phone, ready to take a photo as evidence. But just as she moved, Vanessa's head shot up. Her eyes locked on Emma, sharp as a blade. Looking for something, boss? Vanessa said slowly, stepping out of the shadows like a villain in a movie. Emma's breath hitched, but she didn't back down. Yeah, she said, stepping forward. I'm looking for the truth. Vanessa stepped closer, her eyes narrow, her lips curling into a grin. Careful, Vanessa whispered. You dig too deep, you might not like what you find. Emma stood her ground, her eyes locked on Vanessa, her pulse pounding like a drum. Maybe, Emma said softly. But I'm not afraid to dig. At that moment, a loud crash echoed from the front of the store. Emma and Vanessa both turned toward the sound. What was that? Vanessa asked, eyes wide with surprise. Emma's eyes stayed locked on Vanessa, her gut twisting with suspicion. Let's find out, she said, already walking toward the noise. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew this wasn't just an accident. The loud crash echoed through crown and soul like thunder, sending a jolt of adrenaline through Emma's veins. Her footsteps quickened as she rushed toward the front of the store, heart pounding in her chest. She was ready for anything. A broken display, a customer accident, or maybe even Vanessa accidentally dropping something valuable. But what she saw stopped her dead in her tracks. One of the main display racks had collapsed, scattering dozens of luxury shoes across the marble floor. Boxes had toppled from the shelves, their contents spilled like a crime scene. The towering rack lay at an awkward angle, as if it had been shoved too hard from one side. Emma scanned the room, her eyes sharp and searching. No customers. No employees nearby. But she knew this wasn't an accident. Her eyes flickered to Vanessa, who stood at the far end of the store, phone in hand, eyes wide with mock surprise. Whoa, Vanessa said, her eyebrows raised like she was seeing it for the first time. Looks like somebody wasn't paying attention. Emma's gaze locked onto her like a laser. You were here. You saw it happen. Where's Ethan? Emma asked calmly, eyes still on Vanessa. Vanessa shrugged, sliding her phone into her back pocket. Stockroom, I think. What? You think he did it? No, Emma said, moving slowly toward the scene of the wreckage. Her eyes scanned the floor, searching for clues. The base of the rack was tilted, the bolt still embedded in the floor, meaning it hadn't broken from wear and tear. It had been pushed. Deliberately. Her eyes snapped back to Vanessa. You didn't see anything? Vanessa lifted her hands, palms up, like she was innocent. Hey, I'm not a security camera boss. I was folding bags at the counter. Right? Emma muttered, crouching next to the fallen display rack. Her fingers traced along the metal where the screws had loosened. Her eyes flicked to the floor and spotted something unusual, a fresh scuff mark. A long gray streak trailed across the white marble. She followed it with her eyes. It started at the side of the display like someone had slid their shoe against it, or like someone had braced their foot while pushing. Emma stood slowly, her eyes on Vanessa the whole time. Too clean. Too convenient. Ethan? Emma called, her voice sharp. Get out here. A few moments later, Ethan poked his head out from the stockroom, his eyes wide with confusion. Yeah? He asked, stepping out cautiously. You hear that crash? Emma asked, watching him carefully. Yeah, sounded like something fell, he said, his gaze flicking to the wreckage. His eyes widened. Whoa, what happened? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Emma said, folding her arms. Her eyes darted between Ethan and Vanessa. Any chance either of you wants to save me some time and tell me what really happened? Silence. Vanessa rolled her eyes, shifting her weight to one side. Look, boss, if you're gonna accuse me, just do it already. We all know you've been waiting for a chance. Emma's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her cool. Don't give her the reaction she wants. No accusations, Vanessa, Emma said, her voice calm but firm. Just facts. The display didn't fall on its own. Someone helped it. Vanessa's face remained smug, her eyes narrowing with amusement. Well, since I'm not someone, I guess it wasn't me. Emma glanced over her shoulder at Ethan. He was looking at the display like it was the first time he'd seen it. She could see the genuine confusion on his face, the furrowed brow, the little shake of his head. Not him, she decided. Her eyes slowly returned to Vanessa. All right, Emma said, walking over to the wall near the entrance. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the small black security camera tucked neatly in the corner. She turned her head just enough for Vanessa to see her grin. "Good thing we've got eyes in the sky, huh?" Vanessa's smirk disappeared. Her face went still, her jaw tightening just slightly. Her eyes flickered to the camera, then back to Emma. "Should be fun to see what the footage shows," Emma said, walking back toward the fallen display. "Don't you think, Vanessa?" Vanessa didn't respond. Her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. She glanced at Ethan, who avoided eye contact entirely. "Yeah, you're caught, Vanessa. You just don't know it yet." Later that day, in the office, Emma sat at her desk, eyes locked on the screen. The security footage loaded slowly, the circular buffering icon spinning as if it knew how much she needed it right now. Finally, the footage played. The camera showed a clear, wide view of the store floor. Emma fast-forwarded to 12:48 p.m., just moments before the display fell. She leaned forward, eyes sharp as a hawk. There. Movement. Her fingers hovered over the pause button. The screen showed Vanessa walking toward the display, phone in hand. Emma squinted, watching every detail. She could see Vanessa glance behind her, a quick, subtle glance over her shoulder, then she reached out with one hand. Her fingers curled around the side of the display rack. She gripped it. Emma's jaw tightened. "Got you." Her eyes flicked to Vanessa's shoes on the screen. The footage clearly showed the moment her foot slid back as she braced herself, creating the same scuff mark Emma had seen earlier. Vanessa shoved once, not hard but just enough to make the rack lean. Gravity did the rest. The moment it crashed, Vanessa quickly stepped away, pulling out her phone like nothing had happened. Emma pressed pause. She stared at the image on the screen, Vanessa mid-stride, face perfectly clear. Undeniable. Her heart pounded. She leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on the armrests. Her mind buzzed with possibilities. She had evidence now. Real, solid evidence. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Matthew Coleman. "Matthew, customer complaint. Shipment was delayed. Again. I'm starting to think we have a problem." Emma stared at the message, her jaw tightening. "We do." She typed back quickly. "Emma, we do. But I think I know who's behind it." Across town, Jonathan Drake sat at his glass desk, grinning like a man who just won the lottery. His phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, eyes scanning the message from Ethan. "Ethan, spy, Emma's seen the footage. She knows it's Vanessa. She's gonna tell Matthew." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, chuckling softly. He tapped out a message with deliberate slowness. "Jonathan, not yet, she won't. Let's make sure Vanessa knows what happens to people who snitch." He placed his phone down, letting out a slow, contented sigh. He didn't need to lift a finger. Emma and Vanessa would destroy each other without him ever stepping foot in their store. Back at Crown and Soul, Emma's eyes stayed glued to the footage as she thought about what to do next. She needed to tell Matthew, but something nagged at her. Vanessa wasn't smart enough to pull this off alone. She knew Vanessa was impulsive, petty, and quick to act, but this felt planned. She opened a second video feed, the camera watching the back stockroom. She fast-forwarded until something caught her eye. Her stomach twisted. Her hand hovered over the pause button. Ethan. He was walking through the stockroom, but he wasn't alone. He had his phone in one hand, but in his other hand he had a screwdriver. Emma's eyes narrowed. He moved toward one of the camera mounts, his head tilted up toward it. He stood there for a moment, glancing around, then he reached up. The feed went black. "Oh no," Emma whispered. "No, no, no." Her heart pounded harder than ever. Vanessa wasn't working alone. Ethan. It was Ethan. Her phone buzzed again. It was another message from Matthew. "Matthew, on my way to the store. Be ready to report." Emma stood up, eyes blazing with resolve. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't just dealing with Vanessa. She was dealing with something much bigger. But now she had names. Now she had proof. Emma sat at her desk, fingers laced together, her eyes locked on the frozen security footage. Ethan. Of all the people she suspected, he had barely crossed her mind. Quiet. Polite. Always offering to help. Too helpful. Her gaze flicked back to the image on the screen. Ethan, with a screwdriver in hand, tilting his head toward the camera just before the feed cut. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts racing. This wasn't just petty sabotage. This was a coordinated attack. Her phone buzzed again. It was Matthew Coleman. "Matthew, I'm here." Emma stood, hands steady, heart calm. She had everything she needed now, the evidence, the names, the plan. But there was still one problem. Vanessa. Out on the sales floor. The soft hum of jazz music echoed through the store. The familiar clinking of hangers and the shuffle of shoe boxes filled the air. Customers browsed the shelves as Emma emerged from the back office, eyes scanning for her target. Her gaze landed on Vanessa, standing by the display window, wiping the glass half-heartedly with a cloth. Her movements were slow, lazy, like she didn't care if the window was actually clean. "Vanessa," Emma called, walking toward her. Her tone was steady but firm. Vanessa glanced over her shoulder, sighing as she turned. "What now, boss? Need me to mop the ceiling or something?" Emma's lips pressed into a thin line, always with the sarcasm. "Follow me," Emma said, already walking toward the back. "We need to talk." Vanessa stayed put for a moment, staring after her with suspicion. "What is this, another lecture? I'm not in the mood." "Now, Vanessa," Emma snapped, turning her head just enough for her voice to carry but not her eyes. Vanessa hesitated, then tossed the cloth on the display counter. "Fine." Back office, 5 minutes later. Emma closed the door behind them and locked it. The soft click of the lock echoed in the small office space, and Vanessa's eyes flicked to it with a mixture of confusion and caution. "You trying to trap me in here, boss?" Vanessa said, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "Feels a little extreme." "Sit," Emma said, motioning to the chair across from her desk. Vanessa stayed where she was. "I'm good right here." Emma raised an eyebrow, her patience thinning. "You sure? Because after what I'm about to tell you, you'll want to be sitting down." Vanessa's smirk faltered. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Emma's face, searching for clues. What does she know? Slowly, she moved to the chair, her movements slower than usual, as if it were some kind of power play. "All right, I'm seated," Vanessa said, folding her arms. "What's so important?" Emma sat across from her, leaning forward, her eyes locked on Vanessa's. "I know about the rack you pushed over." Vanessa blinked once, then twice. Her body tensed just barely, her fingers flexing against her arms. "I don't know what you're talking about." Emma pulled her phone from her pocket, tapped a few buttons and set it on the desk. She pressed play. On the small screen, the security footage played. It showed Vanessa walking up to the display, glancing over her shoulder, gripping the side and giving it a quick push. Emma didn't say a word. She watched Vanessa's face. Every blink, every twitch, every glance. Vanessa's face went cold. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. For the first time she had nothing to say. "Want to explain that?" Emma asked softly, her voice calm but sharp as a razor. Vanessa leaned back, rubbing her hands over her face. "I didn't mean to push it," she said, her voice low, defensive. "It just tipped over." "Don't lie to me," Emma said firmly. "I'm not the one you're hurting." "You are." Vanessa's hands dropped from her face, her eyes hard now, her jaw clenched. "Why do you care, huh?" she snapped, voice rising. "Why do you care so much? You already won, Emma. You got your little promotion. You're sitting in that big chair calling the shots. So why are you still coming after me?" "Because you're better than this," Emma shot back, leaning forward. Her eyes were fierce now, her voice like steel. "I've seen you work. I know you're smart. I know you can do more than this petty nonsense. But instead of owning it, you're sabotaging yourself." Vanessa stared at her, lips slightly parted. She blinked, stunned by the words. "Not an accusation. A statement of fact." Emma softened her tone. "You think you're proving something to me? To Matthew? To Patricia? You're not. You're just proving that you'd rather burn down the house than learn how to build one." Vanessa's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She glanced away, eyes distant. Her fingers tapped her arm nervously. "You're on the edge, Vanessa," Emma continued, leaning forward even more. "You can fall or you can climb. But I'm done pulling you up. You have to choose." Silence. For once, Vanessa had no sharp comeback, no snide remark. Just silence. Finally, she exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. "Why do you care so much?" she muttered, almost like she was talking to herself. "Because I used to be you," Emma said quietly. "And I didn't like where it took me." Vanessa's eyes flicked up, locking on Emma's with quiet surprise. Her face twitched like she was about to say something, but she didn't. She just sat there, eyes searching Emma's face for any sign of a lie. "Don't blow this," Emma said softly, standing up. "You're smarter than you think. Don't waste it." Vanessa sat still, her eyes lowered. For once, she didn't have anything to say. Later that day, Matthew walked into the back office, his face grim, his eyes sharp as ever. He closed the door behind him and stood in front of Emma's desk. "What do you have for me?" he asked, his tone all business. Emma didn't hesitate. She pulled up the security footage on her computer, the one showing Ethan in the stockroom. She played it, her eyes flicking to Matthew as he leaned in, watching closely. When the footage showed Ethan tilting the camera and pulling out a screwdriver, Matthew's face hardened like stone. His jaw tightened, his fingers curling into a slow fist. "Ethan," Matthew muttered, his voice like a low growl. Emma nodded. "He's been playing both sides. Vanessa's impulsive, but Ethan? He's calculated. He knew what he was doing." Matthew's gaze darkened. "How long do you think he's been doing this?" "I'd say since he was hired," Emma said, leaning back in her chair. "But I think he's not acting alone." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "You think Jonathan Drake is behind this?" "Wouldn't be the first time," Emma replied, her lips pressed into a firm line. "But now we have proof." Matthew nodded slowly, his eyes locked on the frozen frame of Ethan holding the screwdriver. "I'll handle Ethan," he said, his voice quiet but deadly. "But I'm more interested in Vanessa. What did you decide?" Emma glanced toward the door, thinking of the conversation they just had. She hesitated for a moment, then looked back at him. "Give her one more chance," Emma said firmly. "No more warnings after this. If she messes up again, she's out." Matthew tilted his head, his eyes scanning Emma's face as if testing her judgment. "You sure about that?" "I am," she said. Her voice was steady, unwavering. "If she's smart, she'll figure it out. If not, then we'll know for sure." Matthew stared at her a moment longer, then nodded. "All right," he said. "But don't be afraid to cut her loose." "I won't," Emma said, her eyes sharp with resolve. "But I believe people can change." Matthew tilted his head, his eyes filled with quiet approval. "Let's hope you're right." The rain came down in sheets, tapping rhythmically against the large glass windows of Crown and Soul. The gray clouds outside dimmed the store's natural light, giving it a cold, somber atmosphere. Emma stood by the display window, watching the rain while her mind swirled with unresolved thoughts. Ethan, Vanessa, Jonathan Drake. 3 names. 3 problems. She glanced at the sales floor, her eyes narrowing as she spotted Ethan near the register, pretending to organize receipts. He moved with that same casual ease he always had, too casual for someone working on probation. He's too comfortable, Emma thought. He doesn't know I have him. Yet. Then there was Vanessa, folding shoe bags with robotic precision. Emma noticed something different about her today. Her movements weren't sluggish or half-hearted like before. They were sharp, efficient. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes had changed. Emma took it as a good sign. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at it, noticing a text from Matthew Coleman. "Matthew, the supplier called. Jonathan Drake undercut us. They canceled our next shipment. Call me." Emma clenched her jaw, shoving the phone into her pocket. Drake. Always Drake. Every time they got a step ahead, Jonathan Drake found a way to pull them 2 steps back. Her eyes shifted to Ethan again, watching him shuffle through the receipts. How much of this was his doing? How many of those mistakes were part of Drake's plan? Her fingers curled into a fist. Not this time. An hour later, Emma sat at her desk, the hum of the air conditioning filling the room. The phone was pressed to her ear as she spoke with Matthew. "He's cutting us off," Emma said, her voice low but firm. "Drake's been undercutting our orders and now the suppliers are pulling out." "I figured as much," Matthew replied on the other end of the line, his tone icy. "He's playing dirty and it's working." "Not for long," Emma said, her eyes narrowing as she clicked through inventory files on her laptop. "I've got a plan, but I'm going to need you to trust me." Matthew chuckled softly. "You've earned that trust, Emma. Tell me what you need." Her lips curled into a small grin. Time for Drake to learn who he's messing with. Meanwhile, at the Drake Collective, Jonathan Drake sat in his leather chair, spinning it slowly as he stared out at the rain-soaked city skyline. His smile was sharp, like a man who had already claimed victory. On his desk, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. "Ethan, spy." Emma's quiet. "I think she's planning something." Jonathan tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Emma Thompson. She's persistent, I'll give her that." He typed back. "Jonathan, then apply pressure. If she's quiet, make her loud." "Ethan, spy how?" "Jonathan, make it personal. Everyone breaks eventually." He placed the phone down, his grin widening. He knew how people worked. Push them hard enough and they'd snap. Emma would snap. They all do. Emma was in the stockroom, double-checking inventory logs when her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting another message from Matthew. But it wasn't. It was a blocked number. Her brow furrowed. Spam call? She hesitated, but something told her to answer. "Hello," she said cautiously. There was silence on the other end. Then a distorted voice crackled through the line. "You're in over your head, Emma. Walk away before you drown." Emma's heart stopped. Her eyes darted around the room as if expecting someone to be hiding in the shadows. She clutched the phone tighter, her breathing shallow. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. Silence. Then the call disconnected. Emma stood there for a moment, her mind racing. "It's him. It's Drake." She knew it in her gut. "He's trying to shake me." She put the phone down slowly, breathing deeply to calm her nerves. "Not today, Jonathan. Not today." Later that day, the store floor. Emma was on edge, but she didn't let it show. She kept her movements smooth, her tone calm, and her eyes sharp. Every time Ethan walked past, she tracked him. Every time Vanessa glanced her way, Emma watched. At 2:15 p.m., Vanessa approached. She held a clipboard in her hand and stopped in front of Emma. "Hey," Vanessa said, not making eye contact. She shifted from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. Emma raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" Vanessa looked at the clipboard, then at Emma. Her eyes darted to Ethan, who was counting shoes on the other side of the store. "Can we talk?" Vanessa asked, voice low. "In the back." Emma blinked in surprise but nodded. She glanced at Ethan, then back at Vanessa. "All right." They moved quietly to the back office. Emma closed the door behind them, locking it out of habit. Vanessa glanced at her with a raised eyebrow. "Locking me in again?" Vanessa asked with a smirk. "Old habits," Emma replied, leaning against the desk. "What do you need?" Vanessa hesitated, fingers tapping against the clipboard. She glanced toward the door, then back at Emma. "I know what you think of me," Vanessa said slowly, her eyes focused on the floor. "You think I'm a screw-up." "I know that." Emma didn't respond. She knew Vanessa wasn't looking for sympathy. Vanessa exhaled deeply, rubbing the back of her neck. "But I'm not stupid. I see what's going on. Ethan's dirty, isn't he?" Emma's heart skipped, but her face stayed neutral. So she noticed too. "Why do you think that?" Emma asked calmly, watching every twitch and shift of Vanessa's expression. Vanessa's eyes met Emma's for the first time, hard and sharp. "Because I used to be him," she said bluntly. "I know the moves. He's too smooth. Too quiet. Nobody's that clean." Emma's eyes softened slightly. "She's not as blind as I thought." "You're right," Emma admitted. "But I'm watching him. Closely." Vanessa nodded slowly, her face thoughtful. "If you're gonna take him down, you're gonna need help." Emma raised an eyebrow. "And you're offering?" Vanessa leaned forward, eyes locked on Emma with deadly seriousness. "I'm not dumb, Emma. I know I'm hanging by a thread. You could fire me today and I wouldn't even blame you." She tilted her head. "But if you're serious about catching him, I can help." Emma studied her for a long moment. She wasn't sure if this was a trick or a genuine offer. But one thing was clear. Vanessa was ready to make a choice. "All right," Emma said slowly. "But if you double-cross me, I'll bury you myself." Vanessa snorted, a small grin breaking through. "Fair deal, boss." That night, Ethan was the last one on the floor, cleaning up inventory. He didn't notice the small black dot on the ceiling, a camera that hadn't been there the day before. He didn't notice Emma and Vanessa watching him from the back office. Emma sat at the desk, her eyes locked on the live camera feed. Vanessa stood behind her, arms folded, eyes narrowed. "There," Vanessa said, pointing at the screen. Ethan slipped a small object into his pocket. Something shiny. A phone. Emma's jaw tightened. "Got you." "Time to call Matthew," Emma said, reaching for her phone. Her eyes stayed on the screen, her voice steady as steel. "Yeah," Vanessa muttered, her eyes still on Ethan. "Time to end this." As Emma's phone dialed Matthew, Ethan suddenly froze. He glanced up, his eyes locking directly on the hidden camera. He stared for a second too long. "He knows." Emma's eyes widened. "He sees it." Ethan's eyes darted to the door. Then he bolted. "He's running," Vanessa said, already moving. "I'll get him." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed the phone, running after Vanessa. "Not this time, Ethan. Not this time." The sound of running footsteps echoed through the quiet corridors of Crown and Soul, each step sharper than the last. Ethan's footsteps. Fast, desperate, heavy. Emma's heart pounded in sync with her own strides as she chased him, her eyes locked on his figure darting ahead. He weaved between shelves, his movements wild but determined. Her pulse was a war drum in her chest, adrenaline flooding every nerve. "Stop, Ethan," Emma yelled, her voice carrying through the store like a thunderclap. "It's over. You're not getting out." But Ethan didn't stop. He didn't even hesitate. He was running for his life. Vanessa shot past Emma like a flash of lightning, moving faster than Emma had ever seen her move before. Her arms pumped with power, her focus razor sharp. "Out of my way, Ethan," Vanessa barked as she closed the distance. Ethan glanced behind him, eyes wild with panic. His gaze flicked between Vanessa and the back exit, his only chance of escape. He lunged for it, grabbing the handle. Too slow. With a hard shove, Vanessa slammed into him from the side, pinning him against the wall. Her arm pressed firmly against his chest. "Where do you think you're going, Slick?" she hissed, her breath hot with exertion. "Get off me." Ethan snarled, squirming and thrashing, but Vanessa didn't budge. Her grip was iron, her eyes blazing with the fire of a woman with something to prove. Emma caught up seconds later, breathing hard but steady. She grabbed Ethan's wrist, twisting it just enough to make him stop struggling. Her eyes were ice. Cold. Unforgiving. "Not so smooth now, huh?" Emma muttered, her grip tightening. Ethan's wild eyes locked on hers, filled with rage and panic. "You don't know who you're messing with, Thompson," he spat, teeth bared like a cornered animal. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Emma said, her voice low but lethal. "I'm cleaning house." Vanessa pushed harder against him, leaning close to his ear. "Run your mouth all you want," she whispered. "You're done." They dragged him to the back office. 10 minutes later, Ethan sat slumped in the chair back in the office, his arms folded tight, his eyes glaring daggers at both women. His breathing was heavy, sweat beading on his forehead. Emma stood by the desk, arms crossed, watching him in silence. She wanted him to feel every second of it. Vanessa leaned against the wall, her eyes locked on Ethan like a wolf watching a rabbit. "Let me guess," Ethan sneered, his lip curling. "You're gonna call the cops?" He tilted his head, smirking. "Good luck with that. You've got nothing on me." "Is that so?" Emma asked, walking slowly to the desk. She tapped a few keys on her laptop, and the screen flickered to life. The security feed. The image showed Ethan in the stockroom, holding a screwdriver as he adjusted the camera. Crystal clear. No way out. His smirk dropped. Vanessa laughed, sharp and bitter. "Looks like you didn't think this one through, did you, genius?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for a way out. There was none. Emma tilted her head, her gaze steady and calm. "Here's how this is going to work, Ethan. You're going to sit there and listen. No talking. No excuses." She leaned in, placing both hands on the desk, her face inches from his. "Because if you interrupt me even once, I'll send this footage to every store manager in this city. You'll never work retail again. Got it?" Ethan's nostrils flared, but he stayed quiet. "Good," Emma said, standing up straight. "Now you're going to tell me everything. Who hired you? How long has this been going on? And if you lie, I'll know. So let's make this easy." Silence. Vanessa stepped forward, cracking her knuckles with slow, deliberate force. "Pop pop." She grinned. "She's being nice, Ethan." "Me? I'm not in a nice mood today." Ethan's eyes darted between them, weighing his options. Fight. Or stay silent. He knew two of those choices would end badly. He let out a bitter sigh. "All right, fine." He leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. It was Jonathan Drake. Emma's eyes narrowed. She knew it, but hearing it out loud made her blood boil. "Drake hired me 6 months ago," Ethan muttered. "Said he'd pay me double if I fed him info and stirred up problems here. Wrong orders, delays, missing shipments. All me." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, glancing at Emma. "Told you he was too quiet?" Emma stayed quiet for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then she leaned forward again. "And you're proud of that, huh?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "I did what I had to do." "No, you didn't," Emma said, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You did what was easy. And now you're going to face the consequences." Her phone buzzed. It was Matthew Coleman. "Matthew, I'm here." Emma glanced at Vanessa, her eyes steady with resolve. "Watch him. Don't let him move." Vanessa grinned. "Gladly." She cracked her knuckles again, sitting on the desk just behind Ethan. He didn't look at her. He knew better. Emma left the office, her steps quick, her heart steady. She didn't feel fear. Not anymore. 10 minutes later, Ethan sat slumped in the chair back in the office, his arms folded tight, his eyes glaring daggers at both women. His breathing was heavy, sweat beading on his forehead. Emma stood by the desk, arms crossed, watching him in silence. She wanted him to feel every second of it. Vanessa leaned against the wall, her eyes locked on Ethan like a wolf watching a rabbit. "Let me guess," Ethan sneered, his lip curling. You're gonna call the cops? He tilted his head, smirking. Good luck with that. You've got nothing on me. Is that so? Emma asked, walking slowly to the desk. She tapped a few keys on her laptop, and the screen flickered to life. The security feed. The image showed Ethan in the stockroom, holding a screwdriver as he adjusted the camera. Crystal clear. No way out. His smirk dropped. Vanessa laughed, sharp and bitter. Looks like you didn't think this one through, did you, genius? Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for a way out. There was none. Emma tilted her head, her gaze steady and calm. Here's how this is going to work, Ethan. You're going to sit there and listen. No talking. No excuses. She leaned in, placing both hands on the desk, her face inches from his. Because if you interrupt me even once, I'll send this footage to every store manager in this city. You'll never work retail again. Got it? Ethan's nostrils flared, but he stayed quiet. Good, Emma said, standing up straight. Now you're going to tell me everything. Who hired you? How long has this been going on? And if you lie, I'll know. So let's make this easy. Silence. Vanessa stepped forward, cracking her knuckles with slow, deliberate force. Pop pop. She grinned. She's being nice, Ethan. Me? I'm not in a nice mood today. Ethan's eyes darted between them, weighing his options. Fight. Or stay silent. He knew two of those choices would end badly. He let out a bitter sigh. All right, fine. He leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. It was Jonathan Drake. Emma's eyes narrowed. She knew it, but hearing it out loud made her blood boil. Drake hired me 6 months ago, Ethan muttered. Said he'd pay me double if I fed him info and stirred up problems here. Wrong orders, delays, missing shipments. All me. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, glancing at Emma. Told you he was too quiet? Emma stayed quiet for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then she leaned forward again. And you're proud of that, huh? Ethan's jaw clenched. I did what I had to do. No, you didn't, Emma said, her eyes narrowing into slits. You did what was easy. And now you're going to face the consequences. Her phone buzzed. It was Matthew Coleman. Matthew, I'm here. Emma glanced at Vanessa, her eyes steady with resolve. Watch him. Don't let him move. Vanessa grinned. Gladly. She cracked her knuckles again, sitting on the desk just behind Ethan. He didn't look at her. He knew better. Emma left the office, her steps quick, her heart steady. She didn't feel fear. Not anymore. In the store entrance, Matthew stepped through the front door, brushing rain off his coat. His eyes scanned the store, sharp and focused. He spotted Emma immediately, his face hard as stone. Where is he? Matthew asked, his voice cold. Back office, Emma said. He confessed. It's Drake. He's been feeding him everything. Matthew's jaw flexed. He nodded once, his eyes distant but deadly. Good. Let's end this. They walked together toward the back office. Emma glanced up at Matthew, watching his face. No hesitation. No doubt. Just resolve. When they entered the office, Ethan's eyes went wide. He sat up straighter, his hands fidgeting. He knew who Matthew was. Everyone did. Mr. Coleman, Ethan said, his voice shaky, his eyes darting. Hey, look, man, it's not like that. I was. Shut up, Matthew said, his tone lethal. He glanced at Vanessa, then at Emma. Get him up. Vanessa grabbed Ethan by the arm, yanking him to his feet. He didn't resist. He knew better. You're done, Ethan, Matthew said, stepping closer. You don't just lose this job. You lose every opportunity you'll ever have. He pointed a finger at Ethan's face. I've seen people like you before. You think you're clever, but you're not. You're sloppy. Emma watched as Ethan's face crumbled. His head hung low. He was broken now. Get him out, Matthew said, turning to Vanessa. Call security? Vanessa nodded, gripping Ethan tighter. With pleasure. Emma stayed quiet, her eyes locked on Ethan as he was dragged out of the room. He didn't struggle. He knew it was over. Matthew turned to Emma. What now? Emma glanced at the security feed still playing on the screen. Her eyes were sharp, focused. No hesitation. No fear. Now we go after Jonathan Drake, she said softly. We're not just going to win, Matthew. She glanced at him, her eyes fierce as fire. We're going to bury him. The air inside Crown and Soul was different. Not just because the rain had stopped or because the sun peeked through the windows, casting golden rays on the polished marble floor. No, it was the shift in the people. Everything had changed. Emma stood at the front of the store, arms folded, her eyes sharp and steady as she watched the staff move with renewed purpose. The weight of doubt was gone. She wasn't new manager Emma anymore. She was Emma Thompson, the leader. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Matthew Coleman. Matthew, Drake knows. He's trying to get ahead of it. We'll hit him at 2 p.m. sharp. Emma smirked. Let him try. She turned her attention to Vanessa, who was arranging the new collection display near the front. This time, Vanessa wasn't dragging her feet. Her movements were quick, sharp, and focused. She stacked the display with precision, eyes alert and careful. No more lazy Vanessa. No more shortcuts. Emma walked over, hands in her pockets. Looks good, she said, tilting her head toward the display. Vanessa glanced up, surprised, then nodded. Yeah, well, I figured it should look right, you know? She looked away, rubbing the back of her neck. Can't have customers thinking we're sloppy. Emma raised an eyebrow. Growth. Real growth. Keep it up, Emma said, a rare grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. You're getting there. Vanessa's lips quirked just a little. Don't get soft on me, boss, she muttered, but there was no venom in her voice this time. Just acceptance. 2 p.m., the battle begins. Emma sat in the back office with Matthew Coleman on a video call. His face filled the laptop screen, his sharp eyes blazing with focus. Beside him was his legal advisor, Rachel Grant, a powerhouse in corporate law. Her navy suit was as sharp as her gaze. Is everything ready? Matthew asked, his tone calm but firm. Rachel nodded. We've sent the cease and desist order to Jonathan Drake's corporate office. He'll get it within the hour. But that's not all. She leaned forward, fingers steepled under her chin. We've got the audit results from Drake's warehouse. Turns out, some of the discounted orders he placed were illegal backchannel deals. He's got enough fines coming his way to sink his entire operation. Emma's eyes lit up with satisfaction. Poetic justice. Do it, Matthew said, his voice final. I want every department head at the Drake Collective to know they're working for a sinking ship. Consider it done, Rachel said, tapping her tablet with quick precision. Emma's heart thudded with excitement. She glanced at Matthew. What do you want me to do? Stay the course, Matthew said, his eyes narrowing. Drake's going to panic and desperate men do desperate things. Don't let him bake you. Emma nodded, her face like stone. She wouldn't fall for any traps. Not now. Meanwhile, the Drake Collective. Jonathan Drake sat in his plush leather chair, tapping his fingers on his desk, his jaw tight with irritation. His assistant stood in the doorway, shifting nervously. Spit it out, Corey, Jonathan snapped, eyes sharp as knives. Corey cleared his throat. We just received this. He stepped forward, handing Jonathan a legal envelope marked with the words urgent legal notice. Jonathan snatched it from Corey's hands, ripped it open, and scanned the contents. His eyes moved rapidly down the page. Then they stopped. His face went still. No, his voice was low, quiet, but deadly. Corey took a step back, suddenly aware of the storm brewing. Everything okay, sir? Jonathan's grip on the paper tightened until it crumpled in his hands. His breathing grew louder, his chest rising and falling like a caged animal. He slammed his fist on the desk. Bam. Emma Thompson. He snarled her name like a curse. His eyes flicked to his phone. He tapped it, dialing quickly. It rang twice. Pick up, Ethan. No answer. He called again. No answer. He's not picking up because he's already caught. Jonathan's breath came in sharp gasps. He leaned back in his chair, gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. His mind was racing. No, I can still win. I can still win. But as he stared at the cease and desist letter, his own reflection glared back at him from the glossy table. You're not winning, Jonathan. You're drowning. 4 p.m. victory lap. The store was quieter now, the last few customers browsing leisurely. Emma stood behind the register, watching as Vanessa helped a customer try on a pair of leather boots. Real help. Not fake smiles and forced enthusiasm. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Matthew. Matthew, it's over. Drake's lawyers are scrambling. Emma felt a slow, powerful sense of satisfaction wash over her. She glanced toward Vanessa and called out. Vanessa, come here, Emma said, her tone calm but firm. Vanessa glanced at the customer she was helping, offered them a polite smile and jogged over. What's up? Emma tilted her head toward the back office. Got something to show you? Vanessa frowned but followed Emma. Once inside, Emma closed the door. She pulled up her email, clicked on the message from Matthew and opened the attached file. It was a copy of the corporate alert sent to all of Drake's employees. Vanessa squinted at the screen, her eyes darting over the words. Her mouth slowly fell open. "Wait," she said, pointing at the words. "They're shutting down?" Emma nodded. "Jonathan Drake is done. His whole operation is being audited, and his suppliers are cutting ties." Vanessa's eyes stayed on the screen. Slowly, she leaned back, her face filled with something Emma had never seen before: pride. "You did this," Vanessa said, her voice low, almost in awe. "We did this," Emma corrected, her eyes steady on Vanessa. "I'm proud of you." Vanessa blinked as if she didn't hear it right. "You're what?" "I'm proud of you," Emma repeated, her voice clear and steady. "You didn't give up. You could have walked away, but you didn't. You stayed." Vanessa's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Her eyes darted to the side, her jaw tight. "Yeah, well, I had to be useful somehow, right?" "No," Emma said softly. "You didn't have to be useful. You just had to be better. And you are." Silence hung between them. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy with meaning. Vanessa glanced at Emma, her eyes flickering with something raw and vulnerable. She nodded once, lips tight. "Thanks, boss." Emma smiled. "Not boss this time." Factory reopening, 3 weeks later. The large glass doors of the newly reopened Crown and Soul factory swung open as reporters, suppliers, and guests flooded the grand entrance. Banners hung from the ceiling reading: "Innovation, Integrity, Inclusion." Emma stood at the front, microphone in hand, eyes scanning the crowd. Behind her stood Matthew, Patricia Coleman, and Vanessa, all dressed sharp and proud. "Today isn't just about shoes," Emma began, her voice loud and clear. "It's about second chances. Second chances for people. Second chances for ideas. And second chances for change." Vanessa stood a little taller behind her. Emma's eyes locked on the crowd, her gaze unwavering. "We're not here to just compete. We're here to lead." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Emma took a slow, steady breath. She had done it. Not just for the company. Not just for Matthew. For herself. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more moving narratives filled with redemption, growth, and triumph. Your thoughts mean the world to us, so share your perspective in the comments below. Do you believe in second chances like Emma did for Vanessa? Or do you believe some people don't deserve a second shot? Let us know what you think and stay tuned for more stories that will make you feel, think, and reflect.